Everyone, I know it's been a long time, and I just wanted to show you my latest creation. It's not a costume, it's just a little summer dress, and I've done a very brief tutorial walkthrough of how I've done it, but it is very brief. It's not in depth as we usually do, but I thought I would just do this anyway, just to show you the making of this dress and how it finished out. I'm using this hyacinth blue chiffon fabric and a lightweight pale blue liner. It's very thin. The next thing you want to do is get some spray starch and starch the chiffon. I find this helps stabilise it because trying to cut out pieces from chiffon is very tricky and you have to do it one piece at a time. I then got my pattern pieces and I've cut out the piece in the chiffon on the top that's been stiffened with the starch and liner on the bottom. On each piece here I've got the back and the side back here. On all my pieces I've tacked the two layers together, leaving the bottom open. So that'll be my outer and then that'll be my liner. And the same here on the back and the same here on all the other pieces that you'll need. You can see here I've started putting some pieces together. One thing to note is to make sure that you mount your pieces onto an opposite, because each side is opposite of the other side. So don't mount your piece onto the wrong side. These are my 4 pattern pieces for my bodice. I have a centre front and a side front and a side back and the centre back. Now temporarily join the shoulder seams together with some pins, just so I can try it on for a fitting. As you can see, some of the pieces aren't quite level, so while you have somebody fit it to you, make sure they pin the layers together at the bottom. Not overly tight because you'll stretch it, but just tight enough so it holds the layers in place. And then I'll be cutting that off nice and level. Sewn up the shoulder seams on the outer bodice. I've then gone ahead here and I've made a separate liner, so I have 2 bodices now. You can put a facing on the front and the back, or you can line it fully, which I've decided to do. And again, shown up the shoulder seams on the liner. To do on both your bodices, the outer and the separate liner, is to iron all your seams flat, which is a tricky thing to do, but if you're careful, if it helps, put some pins in, but then you've got to be careful of marking the outside liner because it's so thin. If it was a thicker cotton, I wouldn't be so bad. But basically just iron all, so all your seams are now open and flat, like so. The next thing to do is to attach the liner to the outer bodice. And to conceal the seams on the inside, make sure you're putting good side to good side. So that's your bodice and this is your liner. So the seams are that way, going down on that piece and sticking up towards you. Then you want to pin across the top of the bodice edge, making sure everything lines up and your shoulder seams line up. all the way across. Because this fabric is so slippy, I've decided to tack it across the top as well to stop it from moving. It might be a bit out at the ends, but you can cut that off afterwards so long as everything else matches up. Thing to do is at the front here, it goes down to that heart shape, is to make a little snip so that it'll turn in the right way out much better. And where you've got your curved seams is to make a snip without going through the sewing line. That's a very important thing. I've said this time before, do not cut through your sewing line, okay? So you're just making a few snips along so that it just weakens it a little tiny bit, just without actually going through the sewing, so you can turn it the right way a bit better. And it'll cut the curve or lie a bit better on you when you come to try it on. And you do that on all sides, and also the liner, which at this stage is still separate across the bottom. So do exactly the same, make some snips. You don't need to do it on the straight bits because they're not curved, and you don't need to do it on the side seams. So now what will happen is we will turn it the right way out, and you can just see here, this is now a seam across the top. That's your liner, that's your outer, and you'll just iron those flat, being very careful. Trouble trying to turn the liner under, so I've done some under stitching, which means you force this seam upwards. This is the top edge of your bodice, this is the centre back, and that's the bottom. And on the other side, making sure that your seam is facing upwards, you sew another line just 2 to 3 millimeters above it, and I appreciate that's really hard to see in the camera here, but you can just see another row stitching above it, again keeping that inside seam facing this way upwards. So now it should make it a bit easier to press and turn under for a nice neat edge. The sleeves, I'm making what they call butterfly sleeves. Some people call them flutter sleeves or even umbrella sleeves. They are made without any seams or joins at the back underneath the armhole, and the armhole is off centre. So basically I've got my pattern piece here, and this is already done, and we've got all the measurements and planned it out earlier. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because there's a lot of tutorials out there that will show you how to create a flutter or butterfly sleeve. But basically this is my top, that's the bottom. Underneath, that will go underneath your armhole, underneath your arm, sorry, and that will go directly on top of your shoulder. So it's a slightly different way. I've never done a sleeve quite like this before, but basically you need to take your armhole and you need to measure from the shoulder seam right round to the side seam. So measure that section and make a note of it, and that will be the front. Then you want to measure the back. So again, you will, sorry I haven't got any help at the moment to help me do this video, so you will measure from the seam, go in that way down the back, measure all the way around here back to the side seam. Take those two measurements, write each one down and add them together. So the front plus back on mine came to 35 centimetres when I added the front and back armhole measurements together. Okay, so I got the measurement from my front and back of my armhole. Mine is 35 centimetres armhole length. I then take that 35, I minus 2.5 for my stretch allowance, and I get 32.5 centimetres. The stretch allowance is basically because this is chiffon. As I explained before, chiffon, anybody who's dealt with this knows, it moves like no tomorrow. So basically, just to be really careful, I've cut the armhole a bit smaller than my pattern piece. I'm just being really careful. If I need to, then when it's sewn in properly later, I can trim it back. So I've got the top and the bottom of my armhole, and now I've got that minus 2.5 for the stretch allowance. I then take that 32.5 and I divide it by 6.28 to get my radius, which is 4.5 centimetres. I want to get my sleeve length, which I would like at 20 centimetres. Though you can see here it is 22 centimetres, that's because I've added a bit extra around to incorporate the seam allowance. I'm going to overlock this, so some of that will be chopped off with the overlocking, and again 1.5 centimetres of this will disappear into the seam or so. So I'm going for a sleeve length of a finished length of 20 centimetres, but I've added 2 centimetres for the extra. So coming back to my measurements, sleeve length 20 plus the 2, get 22. And I want to take that 22 and times it by 2 to get 44 centimetres. Next we take that 44 centimetres and we cut out a square of fabric that is 44 long each way. 44, so 44 centimetres square is what I've come out with. That cotton, easy to show you, but the next thing you do is fold it in half. And then when you've done that, you then fold it again. I'm just going to do that a bit neater, if you get the idea. The sleeve length of 22 centimetres with the seam allowance. Next you want to measure from the corner, that's the folded corner here, not the ones that are open. You want to measure that 22, I say it might be different for you, you might have wider arms than me. Measure 22, and you measure 22 from that corner all the way around till you get a curve like this, and then you want to cut that out. Open it out and get your centre, so I've just drawn a little dot there for the centre of the circle. Refer back to your radius, mine was 4.5 centimetres, and I want to draw a line from the centre down 4.5 centimetres long. At the end of that line you've just drawn, you then want to measure 4.5 centimetres all the way around, and you can see I've measured 4.5 at every single angle like so. So that makes a new circle. That cotton, easy to show you, but the next thing you do is fold it in half. And then when you've done that, you then fold it again. I'm just going to do that a bit neater, if you get the idea. Open this out, and this is another practice I've done here in blue cotton. You will cut that hole out that you've just drawn, and then that'll become the bottom, the shorter width there, and this will become the top, the longer width. So that's basically how you create that sleeve. Okay, so I've now got two sets of sleeves because I'm doing a longer one and a shorter one, but basically it's the same shape except these ones are 4 centimetres shorter. So I'll just basically cut out the same thing except it's shorter by 4 centimetres going all the way around. So I'm going to have a double flutter sleeve for my dress. It's also very helpful, I say, as well, to mark the top and bottom. I've marked the top with a blue piece of chalk, sorry, and the same here as well, so I don't lose my mark. The next thing that you want to do on your sleeves is to overlock the edge, or in the USA you call them sergers, and this is the machine here. Also, because I want it to match the colour of the sleeves, I've got my colour here and we've wound on some bobbins because all we've got is these white ones. This is a very complicated machine. I personally leave this to Mum, who knows how to work it. But anyway, that's what this machine has done. So it's knitting off the edges on the outer and inner sleeve on both of them. I then tap them together very near the edge and then run a sewing line there as well, because I'm so worried about this stretching, because that's what chiffon and crepe do, out of shape, that I've secured them together. And I've done this for both the sleeves. Okay, next thing we're going to do is actually put the sleeve in. Now you can see here I've got my shoulder seam, and that's a separate liner there that I sewed on earlier. You want to move that out the way and open that up, move that out the way, so it just leaves you with your outer fabric. So I'm going to start at the shoulder seam. And obviously you've got the outer sleeve and the inner sleeve here, so you want to make sure this is that way up, so the shorter sleeve is on the inside, the longer one is on the outside. And then finding that mark earlier I did, so that was I marked that as the very centre top of the sleeve there. I've done a little blue mark. That mark, you can just see it on this side as well, should line up with that seam. Okay, so at the top here I've done a pin going in long ways. You really should put the pins in long ways all the way around, but I'm really scared to death about putting holes in this fabric, so I'm just very delicately pinning it around the edge. So here we have the top of the sleeve and the centre there, you can see it's pinned to. So continue all the way around and making sure when you get to all your side seams on the inside there that they're all opened out flat like that. Don't make sure they're like that, you know, make sure they are open and flat on the inside. Now pinned my sleeve all the way around, and I'm going to now sew it in place. Okay, so we've now sewn our sleeve in, and this is now what it looks like from the outside. Okay, next we want to neaten the inside of the sleeve where we've got the separate liner. We want to eventually turn that inwards and hand sew it to the edge there, but first of all we'll just turn it over to the outside. We're just putting some pins in to keep the liner straight and tight so it doesn't move, and we're doing that all the way around the armhole. Okay, because we're going round a curve, and to help it a bit easier, just snipping it with some little scissors. Be careful not to go through the main sewing line where you've sewn the sleeve off. Okay. Next we have the seam of the sleeve, and we just need to force it downwards. This is the bottom, so it looks like it's going downwards. And you want to make sure that that stays the same all the way around the armhole. Is to knit it off the inside of the liner. Now we've pinned the seam down in place, so we'll just turn it over. This is quite tricky even if you're using a stiffer fabric, but even trickier as we're using a slippery liner and a chiffon sleeve. But basically you just want to try and neaten it off, turn it over and pin it in place, just so it covers the edge of the seam and covers your sewing line there. Okay, next thing I'm doing, and I'm just finishing up here, is I'm running some little catch stitches, taking a little bit of the fabric here and a little bit of the liner and pulling the needle through. And then you do the same again, catch a little bit of the sleeve there and a little bit of the liner on the edge and pull that through. Moving on to the skirt now, these are my pattern pieces. The front is cut on the fold, and then I've got two side sections. I already did all the measurements earlier on a mock-up, so I know exactly where to cut them to. The thing I've done is I've tried this on, and Mum has marked these little blue lines, so she knows where, marked with pins, so she knows where my waist is level on me. The blue marks are where to cut, so we could cut it straight, and then we put these pins in just to hold all the layers together. The next thing I want to do at this stage is just to move on to my skirt, so I'm using that same blue silky fabric that I used for the liner and the bodice. I've sewn the side seams together on my skirt, and it's at this point that I just want to make sure that side seams on the skirt are going to line up with the side seams on the bodice, which I've already done. So I now know that this fits correctly. I did add a bit extra onto the end of the skirt as well, just to be a bit careful, but so that's what I've done at this point. Taking a step away, I've now got to start doing the frills, which I'm using this lovely blue chiffon fabric for those. I've got them all laid out here on the floor, labelled which section is which. I already did a mock-up earlier before I even started this up the whole dress, so I already know how long I need the pieces of fabric to be before I gather it, because as we know, gathering eats fabric and then basically you have half left at the end, more or less. Right, so my frills, I've cut them out with pinking shears scissors so it doesn't fray in the meantime while I'm moving it around. Each frill I made, measuring from the top to the bottom, 19 centimetres wide. And as I said earlier, I'd already done the measurements for how long I needed every single layer to be, and I'm doing 3 layers. So now coming over to the overlocker machine, I've overlocked the edge, top and bottom of both my frills on the overlocking machine here, so it's now got a nice neat edge. This is the top layer I've got here. At the end of my frills and at the beginning, I'm wanting to do a curve. I don't want to keep them like this straight, I want to curve it off, so I'm just going to run it under the overlocker machine and curve it into the pattern piece I've got here. You can just see that curve there that I've just done on my piece. And next I want to take the top edge of the frills and run a gathering stitch all the way along. I'm using a number 4 for a long one. At the beginning, make sure you do forwards and backwards. to secure it. And then just run it along, keeping the foot more or less on the edge, centimetre distance. And you're going to do that along the whole top edge of the frill till you get to the other end. Towards the end of the sewing now, we just want to run it off. Don't go forwards and backwards at the end because you need to be able to pull the gathering stitches. Gather the middle section and the bottom row. I've stopped halfway along. Here we go. I've stopped halfway and then started it again so that I'm gathering it in two halves because I don't want to risk the thread snapping or something going wrong, and it's a lot of fabric to deal with in one go, so I'm going to be gathering that in two halves, and the same with the bottom as well. I needed to find out on the back seam where I've got to start sewing it from because I'm going to be putting a zip in the whole of this dress down the back. So I had to temporarily pin the skirt, which I'll show you how to do in a bit in this video. So I just temporarily pinned it to the bodice, leaving the back all the way open, and then I had to have Mum fit it on me, so you'll probably need a hand with this, and she was able to trim off any excess fabric off the back seams there, because there was quite a bit, and also trim any excess off the seam on the back of the skirt. So now we've got our length, which about I need a 16-inch concealed zip. We've put a mark there where to start sewing, and I'm just going to sew this back seam up right the way to the bottom of the skirt. Moving on to putting the frills on, I'm going to start by sewing the top layer on, but before I've done that, as I've already done a practice run of this earlier on a mock-up, I know exactly where my measurements are going to be, and the second frill is going to start 2 centimetres underneath the end of the last frill, and for me that works out 15 centimetres from the top. So I've gone around the whole skirt and marked 15 centimetres out in pins, being as careful as possible. I'm going to start off centre, and I already worked out that it needs to be 9 centimetres to be off centre, so I've already worked out that it needs to be 9 centimetres out from the side seam. Okay, so I've started pinning the frill on the top edge, and now I've reached the back seam. This is where a zip is going to go in, so I need to cut the frill down the middle here. I'm going to overlock it like I've done the top edge. It will need to be flat for the next couple of centimetres because that will be sewn into the zip. Okay, I've now gone and sewn the top frill on. I pinned it and then I tacked it in place, and now I've sewn it, and you must make sure that the back of your skirt, the liner, is flat. No puckers or gathers on the back, you must keep that as flat as possible. So going around all the way to the back here, obviously we get to the opening where the zip will be, and then eventually this top half will be connected to the bodice. I've overlocked it down the side here, and if I could find it, it's disappeared. No, I've completely lost it now, but basically, yeah. So you've got your back opening here for your zip, and it's been overlocked on both those edges because that will be incorporated into your zip and turned over nice and neat like that eventually. You want to leave a little bit more of this on the edge, just to be a bit careful, but that's just me. And then I've started to do the frills on the next level. Here you can see that top level. I've now also curved it using the template pattern piece I showed you earlier. So basically this is where I started. that's curved, so that'll go there, and then when I come back round to the other side, this is overlapping. You can just see a couple of layers there by about 2 centimetre overlap, so that it goes directly, you can just see there, it's now laying directly over the top of that one and covering that up. So this is where it starts getting a little bit involved. The practice run is advisable, like I did earlier. The next frill is starting from just below where you've sewn that top frill on. So you're starting about there, and that is roughly where the top frill goes underneath starts. So you're meeting the second frill, the edge of that up, nearly butted up against it but not quite, and you'll be wanting those marks that you did with the pin earlier. Remember mine was 15 centimetres from the top to there, so that was all pinned and marked earlier in the video. Basically you want this to hang and do like a zigzaggy thing, which will become clear a bit later on. So where my first mark was for 15 centimetres to carry on a straight line going across the skirt, I've got to go from here and get it to meet here. So I put a pin there to start, and I put my mark there when my first 15 centimetre mark was from the top to there, and then I just basically filled in the bits in between to join those up in that curved shape. You can more or less see here, and then we just carry on pinning it round the skirt at the marks I made earlier, so it should all be straight. So that's all I'm going to do at this point. I'm going to sew that bit on first until I get back round to the front, so it gets a little bit complicated. And I've sewn that second layer of frills in, and just to give you an idea of what it looks like, what's going on underneath. I've got my top layer here, and you go up and then you curve it round, and then just continue around the rest of the skirt like so until you get back round the beginning. And as I said earlier, this is where it gets a little bit involved, so you've got to move that out of the way. So you can imagine you've sewn all the way back round at the same distance from the top. Very important, keeping your skirt flat and your seams flat inside. And then you come back round here, and you want this kind of thing to sort of go on similar to the other side. Curve round, and then you're going up, so then this just eventually just will hang down like that. Have a bit of a mind of its own, but there we go. So you just sew and then again, once you've sewn that on, you can then get the curve for the top one using the template again I showed earlier that I've done on all the edges, all curved round like so. So when you open it up, you've got this kind of thing going on. Again, there's your top layer, like so on. So they're almost meeting but not quite. So next is the final layer. The thing I'm going to do is join the skirt to the bodice, and you can see here I've put the pins in place, put them upwards, and the most important thing as well is to make sure that the side seam and there matches the side seam on your skirt. And as I already did a trial run of this earlier, it's all worked out, but sometimes even then it doesn't. So basically just pin the edges of the skirt, see the frills hanging down there, to the edge of the bodice, and I'm going to tack that in place by hand with some thread so it doesn't move, and and then I'm going to sew it a good centimetre and a half in for my seam allowance and sew those two sections together. Here is create a band to go around the waist. So I've cut one here. It's about 82 centimetres long and 7 centimetres wide. I've got my band and I've overlocked the edges together. Just bear in mind that when you have your width, to add that little bit so that you can overlock the edges. What you want to do is sew on the band upside down like this. Eventually that will come over nice and neat like that. So keeping your frills out of the way, make sure your seam allowance excess is facing downwards, as you can see there. Just sew it all the way across, right way to the other end. The next stage is, as explained earlier, is to fold your trim back on itself and pinning it in place, keeping the seam flat on the inside, pointing that way down, and making sure all your frills are kept flat at the same time. And you want to pull this as tight as you can get it without ripping it. It is a little bit involved, but basically pulling this as tight as possible here, take, how can I say, lift a part of the belt up from below so it reveals the underneath part, and you want to catch stitch it using little tiny stitches all along to the other side. And then what will happen is this folds down back over, covers that up, and then you'll just iron it flat. Next, I've gone and sewn in our invisible zip. Now, because there are many tutorials out there to tell you how to sew an invisible or concealed zip in, to save us explain it all over again, please see some other YouTube tutorial videos that tell you exactly how to do it. So that has been sewn in, but we hit a glitch before in that the frills under here had to be unpicked and taken back so that we could just sew the zip to the liner, and then we could obviously re-sew those frills in place so they just hang over the opening. When you've zipped it up, it'll look like that. So now it's been pinned in, and inside you can see the zip is still a bit loose here, so I just need to attach some catch stitches down to hold that in place by taking a piece of the liner and sewing through part of the zip there without going through to the outside. Okay, so this is obviously the finished dress that you saw at the beginning of the video. For the information on the making of written tutorial is on the description box below this video, linked there, so please check that out. Please check all my other videos out and my other tutorials I've done over the years, my costumes and stuff. Thank you very much again for watching. Bye!